Hello everyone and welcome to our latest conversation on repowering renewable energy projects. By way of a recap, repowering is going to come right the way up the agenda in the coming years, as a lot of our ageing renewable energy fleet was built some time ago now, starts to come to the end of its life. And the question is, what do we do with those sites? Do we put new projects on them? Are they capable of adopting new projects? We're going to need to do something with them in order to continue to meet our net zero targets. I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague Cathryn from the planning side.
Hello, Ross.
Here in Bristol, and by Patrick Munro in Edinburgh.
Hi, Ross.
Hi. Let's start with the first question. So I think the first one is, and I've asked this on the real estate side as well, if you've got an existing site, it's been operating, it's been doing well for many, many years since coming to the end of its life, it might be reasonable to assume that in a sense, it's a proven use of the site, so planning for a replacement project on that site, a repowering, ought to be relatively simple. Is that the case, or are you back to square one with planning?
Yeah, you're certainly not back to square one. I mean, you start from a very good position. As you said, you've been on the site for a while, so you know the site itself, you know the landowners, you're already established in the community as a project. But there is the big different commercial consideration from bare land, where you're having to decide when to end that operational wind farm's life and effectively end that revenue stream that it generates. And that does have planning implications. And so really getting a consent strategy in place is key. Understanding what the timeline you want to have for when you basically dovetail the end of your operational site, ideally to start with the construction of your new repowered site. So aligning those consents, looking at what the decommissioning obligations are on the old one, how you might gain some efficiencies in your construction programme, for example, and also the repowered wind farm will inevitably be a different layout, turbines of a different scale. So you need to see how that is all going to fit together. And so really having that commercial consideration in mind when you're putting together a consent strategy is the big difference compared to bare land, where you've got a little bit more flexibility on your timeline.
And as part of that strategy, you may seek a life extension first before you go into repower, to bridge that gap between the ending of the current project and the starting of the new one.
Okay, no, that's... And I suppose, it could be a new project. It could be, as you say, on a new footprint, new turbines. If you're talking about wind, ultimately we'll also be repowering the solar projects. But I guess from a planning regime perspective, and I know that there's different jurisdictions around the UK, and you're witness to that. But is there any guidance or presumptions that says this site has been used before, therefore you ought to grant planning permission for this?
Yes, in England we have the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, and that contains a strong policy at paragraph 163 that says for repowered sites, significant weight needs to be given to the fact that it is on an existing site. So you're using a site that's already been used for onshore renewables, so long as those impacts can be made acceptable, which is part we'll probably come on to about the changes and the top. What's happened in the last 10 years. In Wales, repowering is in policies 17 and 18 of Future Wales 2040, which is again a very strong presumption in favour of renewable development. Okay, and what about in Scotland, Patrick?
Yeah, in Scotland there is strong policy support for repowering. National Planning Framework 4, Policy 11, which has very strong support for renewable energy projects in general, specifically singles out repowering as being supported, subject to meeting various other planning considerations. And the onshore wind policy statement made very clear that repowering was supported by the Scottish Government, and it quite importantly acknowledged that many of the turbines would be bigger, these would be different in the landscape, and having that recognition in policy is obviously a great starting point when you're bringing one repowering project forward.
Okay, now that's a big plus. I suppose as well. Look, we're 20 years odd since the first projects were built, aren't we? Amazingly, and a lot will have moved on. A lot's moved on in a whole variety of areas: grid, power, purchasing, and so forth. But on the planning and consenting side, I'm well aware that the regimes have changed, have been tweaked, have altered. what should developers be aware of if they're thinking of repowering a project? What are the key big differences between now and 20 years ago? Would you say? Who wants to take that one?
Should I start, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely.
In England, we've not really had renewable projects coming forward, so we have not seen the steady growth in the height of turbines. So that's a key one, just for local communities and landscape and visual impacts, but also for the highway network and transporting these 70, 80 metre long blades, 200, 250.
So that might be a shock.
I think it will be a shock.
Okay.
And it's definitely it's a consideration because those low bridges that you went under before, can you?
Yeah.
So we see that as an issue that you need to think about and have a strategy to deal with, and how you manage that with the local communities that are used to wind, but possibly not as big. And that's something to be managed. I think Scotland's a bit further in front, I think, in terms of its thinking and preparing communities for that.
Yeah, but I do think that there's the practical issues, as Cathryn's pointed out. Simply getting the new infrastructure to the site is not always as easy as it once was. But there are more sort of technical legal aspects as well. The environmental impact assessment regime has moved on. You need to look at how you would scope what your assessment, what you're going to look at in the repowering project. What is even the baseline? The environmental baseline will have changed since you had that first project in place. There may even be other wind farm or solar developments in the vicinity that you need to take account of from a cumulative perspective. So there's a bit of practical and also some legalistic points as well that you need to be mindful of. I would say, though, the other bit that Cathryn mentioned, that these are projects that have been in the community for a long time. And I think that through the planning process for repowering projects, you have a genuine opportunity to do good and bring some added benefits to those communities that you're already in, whether that's a biodiversity enhancement type perspective, or whether it's having the community involved in some way in the wind project, whether that's a community benefit type fund, or whether it's actually shared ownership, which is something that's now being encouraged in Scotland as well. Those types of things are something for the developer to think about when they're deciding how they can progress these new projects in the community that they've been in for many years.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think you touched on this originally there, Patrick. You've got the old project there, presumably, unless the original developer's not doing the repowering, has taken it away. But if you are going to dismantle the original project, do you need planning for that?
No, quite often the original planning permission will have envisaged decommissioning happening at some point. The standard would be that you'd have to submit a decommissioning plan for approval and then undertake those works. What I've had experience of in various repowering applications is trying to see if there's a way that you can align your new consent with the decommissioning of that old project and gain some construction efficiencies, for example, by not having to mobilise twice, do the decommissioning that streamlines into the construction activity. Probably more complex from a technical perspective, and that's something that needs to be taken account of in planning as well. But again, these are the type of efficiencies you can gain if you set it up and think about the strategy at the very start.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to mention was just on the previous question, because it occurs to me that we've also now, when you look 20 years hence from the first project, whether they're wind or ultimately solar, when you come to repower these, now the world has moved on and people might be looking at hybrid projects, solar with batteries, wind with battery storage, possibly even hydrogen. So they're a different type of project, not only in terms of the size of the technology or the developments in the technology, but also the actual technologies that you might be seeking to get consent for. And I suppose there's an issue there. Look, I'd like to finish, if I may, by just, I guess, throwing it open to both of you, just saying, so top tips really, and takeaways for anyone considering repowering. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go. Start early.
Yeah. Okay.
And think about what it is you want, what you've got, what you want, and how you're going to get there, and make a plan for that. And that needs to be, I think, on its broadest spectrum. So not just planning or the physical apparatus, but the communities and how you can bring them with you.
Okay. Patrick, anything to add?
No, nothing to add on that. I think Cathryn's absolutely right. It is the early consenting strategy that looks across the full engineering commercial land piece as well and sees how planning fits within that rather than planning necessarily being the driver.
Okay. Well, look, thank you both very much. Much appreciated. If you'd like to find out more about our talks on repowering, or this one in particular, then get in touch with any of us here via our website. The talks in their entirety will be on our website and also on our social media channels as well. Thanks again.